This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Friends, it's a pleasure to be here today at dinner, and if I may use an Indian expression, I hope that now you are all fed up. We can take some questions. So I would be happy to, have any of you get up, introduce yourself, and ask me questions and to answer. Thank you.
Very shy group.
Please.
Professor.
Okay, there's a mic.
I'm Mary Bullock, and I teach Chinese politics and U.S.-China relations at Emory. And you had a wonderful talk this afternoon, and floating in the background was the issue of China. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you see India's relations with China today.
India, has China as a neighbor to the north. We are seeking to broad base our relations with China and not to have them hinge on any one particular issue, because we realize that the future of peace and stability and prosperity in Asia will, in a sense, depend on how countries like India, China, the US, Japan handle their inter se equations and relationships. Our trade and economic relationship with China has grown substantially. In terms of trade in goods, they are today our largest trading partner, though if we add trade in services, then the US becomes the largest trading partner. The relationship is complex and it's not without its problems. We've, have issues on the border which is unsettled, and the negotiations to resolve that have been continuing for some time. We have political representatives who are now engaged on the issue. Progress has been much slower than we would have hoped for. But we have an agreement to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas, pending a border settlement, and that has largely held. So in terms of actual peace along the border, I think that has been sustained. We also have, now taken a decision to have a strategic dialogue with China. This focuses on a number of global issues on which India and China, given the fact that we are broadly large developing countries, even though China's economy is far ahead of India's, have similar views and positions. Our Prime Minister has said that the world is large enough to have two major economies like India and China growing simultaneously. And if they continue to grow, they can be engines of growth for the global economy. I think our effort is to ensure that we manage our relationship in a way which is non-conflictual and which builds on the positives in the relationship, even though we recognize that there will also be elements of competition. Please.
Can't cut you off. This is a nice segue. This is a nice segue question from China to India. The one issue that China has had that has allowed them to grow is unrestricted capital to improve infrastructure. And the 5-year plan, they put money wherever they wanted to spend it. In India, there may be the money there, but the masses oftentimes step in the way of progress, particularly with infrastructure development. And one example, when Tata tried to put the nano facility in West Bengal, the farmers rose and prevented that from happening. And of course, the road between Delhi and Agra ran into that same circumstances, but the chief minister of UP seemed to appease the farmers and pay them their equitable amount of their compensation. So two contrasts there, but something you read all the time, the infrastructure will prevent India from reaching its capacity. So what's the central government doing about that, to improve it?
It's a key priority for the government. Clearly, our infrastructure is a constraint. It's well beyond or below what we require right now. It's estimated that we would need almost $2 trillion over the next 10 years or so for investment in infrastructure. The government is doing a variety of things, and I would say that the glass is half full rather than half empty. We've made progress in a number of areas, including, for instance, mobile telephony, where, as I mentioned, from a position where we were, we had 2 million people on a waiting list with a government monopoly provider, we now would be reaching almost 800 million telephone connections. And sometimes we add 10 to 20 million new phone lines in a month. That's the speed with which new mobile connections are being given. So if you take the telecom sector, certainly huge improvement, huge change in the scenario. If you take airports, you see now we have new airports in Delhi, Hyderabad, and Mumbai, which have been done on the basis of public-private partnership and are really fairly good. The new Mumbai one will be built at Navi Mumbai, and the environmental clearances for that have just come through. Roads as well, you can see the national highway network has certainly made a huge difference, but we would like progress to be faster and have put in place a regulatory framework to encourage private sector participation in the infrastructure sector. We allow 100% foreign direct investment and private investment in most of the infrastructure sectors. And we also encourage public-private partnerships, as we have done for the airports, which have been built in cooperation. The land belongs to the government, and there's a consortium of private companies which have actually built the new airport and then will run it on a long-term lease for 30 years, with a revenue sharing arrangement with the government. In other cases, the government is willing to give up to 25% what they call viability gap funding. This is where a project is not viable commercially. The government can assess on a case-by-case basis and give up to 25% as direct government cash infusion to a project to ensure its viability. So I think we have enhanced the government resources that we are putting into the infrastructure sector, B, created conditions for greater private sector participation through a variety of innovative policies and regulatory frameworks. But we are a democracy, and there's no way we are going to be able to, steamroller opposition. We have to constantly negotiate our way through these issues if they come up. There are states, and it varies from state to state. The experience, as you yourself said, varies from state to state. So there are states which have land readily available, which have put in place the kind of requisite policy bodies to ensure land for industrial development. For instance, when Tata couldn't get land in Bengal for the nano, he moved to Gujarat and got land very quickly. So you have one experience where politics derailed a project. You have another one where it was able to give it very quickly. And to just give you an example, like both BMW and Volkswagen, which went into India when I was ambassador in Germany, came back and told me that from start to finish, they were able to complete their factory for BMW for assembly, Volkswagen for production, almost the fastest that they could do anywhere in Asia, and well ahead of the schedule that they had bargained for. So the experience varies. You have to do your homework, find which state is, has a favorable environment, go there. And for the governments, I think the biggest compulsion will be that people will demand the infrastructure.
Ambassador, the question I have is about Atlanta. When are we going to have a consulate here?
Okay. I have to say that, quite often diplomats have the job of bearing bad news, but today I have the job of bearing good news because we are going to open a consulate in Atlanta. Permissions from the State Department were pending. We were able to get clearances some time ago. Since we wanted 2 consulates and clearance came for only 1, then the government of India had to take a view where they would establish it, Seattle or Atlanta, and they have decided on Atlanta.
Ambassador, my name is Shivaji. I have a question. Over the last few years, what we have seen, India is moving from the multilateral trade agreement to the bilateral arrangement. Do you see that as one of the way India is going to deal with the other countries as well? And do you see that as an advantage over the multilateral?
Our preference is to have a multilateral trading arrangement because we believe that that is what really guarantees, particularly to developing countries, an equal playing field. But the WTO agreements have really not been moving. I mean, the negotiations have not been moving. And in the meanwhile, we have been, as part of our effort to strengthen our relations, particularly with the Asian countries, moving ahead in terms of bilateral free trade agreements, but also broader regional free trade agreements. Within South Asia, we have traditionally provided special trading arrangements to smaller countries in our neighborhood, Nepal and Bhutan. With Nepal, it was non-reciprocal duty-free access for Nepalese manufactured goods to come to India. It's an open border. Nepalese can come and work in India. For Bhutan, it was a reciprocal zero duty free trade agreement. Then we had one with Sri Lanka as well. And we have a South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, which has negotiated a South Asian free trade agreement, which encompasses Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And of course, since most of the countries are LDCs, or least developed countries, India will take the initiative to liberalize much earlier than they would. There are staggered implementation schedules. Unfortunately, Pakistan has not really moved despite the agreement. So in that sense, there's a bit of an impediment there, which, if removed, would really redound to the welfare of the people of Pakistan and the region. But, we are moving ahead. We also have a free trade agreement with ASEAN and bilateral free trade agreements which go beyond the ASEAN free trade agreement with, these are called comprehensive economic partnership agreements with Singapore, with South Korea, and now we have negotiated one with Japan, which is in the process of being approved on both sides. The formalities are being completed, and then it would be signed. We've also just finished negotiating one with Malaysia. So I think with Asia, it's been part of our Look East policy with a view to strengthening relations with Asia. We have also commenced negotiations with Europe, with the EU, because we did a study, a joint study from both sides, if it would be of benefit to negotiate a comprehensive trade and investment agreement. Those negotiations are still ongoing. We haven't really looked at free trade agreements with the rest of the world. Some preferential trading arrangements are in place with the Gulf Cooperation Council. They're not very substantive, or with Mercosur. But I think that this is really the way the world is going if we don't move ahead multilaterally. Please. I can't give you a time frame as yet. We've just got the clearance from the government of India, and they have done the basic spade work of the kind of staffing pattern that they will have. So now we have to really, go with this to the State Department, get their final clearances, locate property, locate people, and then get them here. But our hope is that at least sometime this year, we should be able to get it operational before the end of the year.
It's a good time to buy commercial real estate. And the farmers here are very welcome.
Okay, good.
So, Ambassador, I'm Rosemary McGee, and welcome to Emory, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And we've had many discussions about technology and markets and kind of the worldwide global influence that India is having now. But one of the most important areas where India has made an influence in the world is in the cultural life, in literature, the arts, spiritual life. And as India changes and moves ahead in kind of a world power, do you see that kind of influence continuing across the world as well?
I would imagine so, because, at one level, what is interesting about India is that it's able to hold on to what is old along with what is new. And I draw your attention to a very interesting article I read about an Indian space scientist working for the Indian Space Research Organization, and his comment on the Indian moon mission. He was involved with the Indian moon mission, which sent a probe to the moon. Now, in Indian mythology, the moon is like a god. He's Chanda Mama, there's God uncle. And the person asked him, don't you find any contradiction in the fact that you as a scientist are sending a scientific probe to probe what is sacred or, holds special significance for you? And he said, no, I don't see any contradiction between the two. One was his scientific self and the other was his religious self, and they continued to exist simultaneously without one conflicting with the other. So I hope that we are able to retain what is lofty, what is great from our civilization. But at the same time, I would say that the change and transformation which is taking place in India today has brought its own burst of creativity. Because as India has opened up to the world, you see that it is absorbing influences from outside, soaking them in, and then transforming it into something new. And this is India's genius, to take what comes from outside, mold it, twist it, and then make it Indian in its own way. So you see that in classical dance, where dancers who were purists are now experimenting, with choreography, with jazz, with all kinds of things. Whereas earlier the critics would have fallen on them like a ton of bricks, saying you deviated from the from the classical, laid out script or whatever. Now people welcome it. So it's important that we don't see culture as sterile. It's a constantly moving and evolving process. And because of the heterogeneity of India, because of its diversity, because it's a bit raw, like the United States, there's an immediacy also about the culture, particularly the popular culture, which has appeal across the world. If you've seen Bollywood films, when I went to Germany, I was surprised in the airport guide, it had a little thing saying, the following bars have Bollywood theme parties, and you can learn Bollywood dancing at the following places. So I came to the conclusion that I had not been properly trained as an ambassador because I had not been taught Bollywood dancing before I left. But there was always hope in that I could learn it before I finished my tenure in Germany.
Good evening, Ambassador Shankar. My name is Ram Chilap. I'm a professor at the business school here at Emory. My question relates to sort of the world happenings today. India has had a long-standing relationship with Egypt as one of the original non-aligned movement, participant and so on. Perhaps not so relevant today, but maybe it is. But I was curious about the official government stance on what is going on, because I can see that the U.S. government is kind of quite two-faced about it at times. What is the official government stance? I haven't seen much in the Indian newspapers. So,
as a democracy, we are always sympathetic to people's aspirations, and we have welcomed the expression of the people's will. Like other countries, we hope that the transformation which is taking place in the region will be democratic, will enhance freedom, and will also be orderly, because there is concern. I think there's a huge degree of optimism because of what has happened. At the same time, there is concern that it shouldn't lead to destabilization or anarchy. But we are confident, the way the people in Egypt and elsewhere have expressed themselves, we are confident that this process will move forward in a way that meets their aspirations.
Ambassador, there is a lot of progress being made between higher education between India and US. But is there anything happening in primary, secondary school systems where some of the US secondary primary school systems can help India in helping that?
At the moment, we are really looking for collaboration, not in the elementary and primary school area, but in the area of higher education and vocational education or skill development. The reforms that we are undertaking in education are really broad-based. They cover all three sectors. In the school sector, we have moved the Right to Education Bill, which ensures free and compulsory education to every child between the age of 4 and 14 in the first phase, and I suppose in the second phase, we would extend that age group higher. This means the government has to put the resources to fulfill this right which has been conferred on the people. At the same time, we are greatly expanding university education, which has been, in some sense, on a plateau, because with the focus of government spending being on primary and secondary school education, university education funding had been squeezed for the last decade. As a result, you can see that demand is far more than supply in India. And you see that in the fact that there are 100,000 Indian students in the United States, 30,000 or so in the UK, large numbers in Australia and Canada. And this is because children who may do very well still don't get the subject of their choice in the university of their choice because the competition is so intense. That's why I'm glad that after many years of a squeeze, the government is actually investing in creating new infrastructure facilities in higher education, because we were living off the invested capital post-independence to some extent. So now we will be creating 8 new institutes of management, IITs, 20 new institutes of information technology, 3 new institutes of advanced science and research. We will be setting up degree colleges in every district which doesn't have one, etc. We are creating a big knowledge network which will link by all these colleges through and universities through broadband. So there's a huge, very ambitious program on the agenda. And the final element of this is vocational education, where again we are massively stepping up outlays, but also trying to do the vocational education training in a different way than we have done in the past, by linking up with the private sector, so that at the end of the day, there are deployable skills and people who emerge through this process can actually find employment in the Indian market. Where we are looking for active collaboration from overseas is in the field of higher education, is in the field of vocational studies or community colleges or skill development.
Good evening, Ambassador. I'm Arjun Khurana. As the United States gets out of this recession, we can see that the current administration is taking a two-pronged approach. One is to boost exports. The second is to reduce job losses through outsourcing. And although not in the American press, but in the Indian press, President Obama has often been stated as saying, don't take our jobs, buy our goods. What do you think is India's response to that?
I think both should buy goods and services from each other. I think President Obama himself, when he visited India, basically said that, these are really old stereotypes. And the reality is that trade and investment cooperation between India and the United States is mutually beneficial and creates jobs and prosperity in both countries. If you look at the trade data, that's clearly evident, because our trade is growing, but it's still modest. Two-way trade was 48.3 billion in goods. Trade and services in 2008, this is 2010. Trade and services 2008, latest figures, US figures, $38 billion in two-way trade, little over 19 billion in US exports, little over 18 billion in Indian exports. So a trade surplus, small for the US, or in other years, services trade has been broadly balanced. Again, if you look at investment flows, Indian companies are now investing quite substantive amounts in the US. Between 2004 and 2009, Indian FDI to the US has been about $25.5 billion, according to a study. US figures don't reflect this because they show only greenfield investment, which is about $5.5 billion. But Indian companies have also invested 20 billion in mergers and acquisitions, which have saved jobs and turned companies around. And this is leading to many jobs within the US economy. So overall, I would say that trade and investment cooperation between our two countries is really synergistic. It really doesn't, it is not one where it affects adversely jobs and employment in the other.
Thank you. Oh, one more? Okay. Ambassador, thank you. My name's Hank Klibanoff. I teach journalism here. And I would be curious to hear from you, even though you've been in this country and you've watched the state of news media in this country and you've seen the shift in emphasis from newspapers to internet. Can you tell us what is happening back in India in regards to this? Thank you.
I think there's been an explosion of electronic media in India in recent years. I think there are hundreds of TV channels, and as is in India, we do everything to the power of 1 billion. It's the number of 24-hour news channels that we have is many more than the United States, and in 22 different languages as well. Of course, this has meant that the reach of the electronic media has gone very wide and far. At the same time, because of the intense competition amongst channels, we've also seen some things which are not that welcome. You know, for instance, a tendency towards sensationalism and trivialization in the effort to grab eyeballs. But overall, the growth of the media market, I think, means that Indians are better informed and that it is an age of much greater public scrutiny, much greater public information. News media, the print media in India is also doing relatively well, whereas I know that in the US, it is struggling to survive. And there's talk that delivery models might change to electronic format in future if the print media isn't able to hold its own. I think for India, that will still be a way into the distance because penetration of internet is not that great. It's really the electronic media which has the widest reach. I mean, the television, which has the widest reach.
One more question. You mentioned about your interest in collaborating in higher education and also in vocational training. I mean, clearly that will benefit India in a big way, but in the structuring of that concept, what incentives are you offering foreign institutions, and what benefit do you think they might get out of this relationship?
We think they should come there from the goodness of their hearts. No, but strictly speaking, I think that there is an exciting, there are exciting opportunities for American universities because there is such a close connection with India, both in terms of the faculty. I mean, I see here, for instance, and as I see in every university I visit, that there are, you know, really good members of the faculty who are of Indian origin, who have a natural interest in building collaborative linkages with institutions in their former home country. Similarly, there's a very large number of Indian students, and many US universities, for instance, are interested in attracting more Indian students. This would certainly help that. There are universities who are interested in deriving benefit from India's R&D capabilities. For instance, one university I know is already looking at setting up 3 or 4 research and development centers in India in partnership with an Indian partner, but then to also follow a graduate program. So the graduate program would provide experts for the R&D program, which they also want to do. There are many Indian private entrepreneurs who are looking to set up universities and are looking for collaborative arrangements, on a commercial basis with US universities. So I would say that there would be mutual benefits in this process, but we are not, unlike, the countries in the Gulf, providing incentives in terms of financial incentives to universities to get into India.
I'd like to thank Ambassador Shankar once more. Very good. Thank you. Now, finally, on behalf of Holly Simetko and the other sponsors, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and also give a special tribute to the students from India and from the Indian diaspora, from whom we really are learning about the emergence of India. So thanks and have a nice evening.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.